All right, so Nintendo's president has officially weighed in on the Nintendo Switch 2 price situation and his exact statement on whether or not you might be looking at a console price increase during the Nintendo Switch's generation, because yes, unfortunately, right now we are talking about potentially electronics getting more expensive in their current life cycle, not less. But we're going to break down exactly what he said, and depending on if you've secured a pre-order or not, you may feel more or less comfortable with having one or not, or if you were sitting on the sidelines waiting, these comments might make you want to potentially get one sooner rather than later. We also had a whole host of new information hit. Primarily, the big high points I want to hit in this video have to do with Nintendo Switch 2 initial sales forecast. How many units are they predicting it to sell versus what did the Switch 1 do? And regardless, my opinion is we are looking at a historic console launch despite this forecast from Nintendo, and we did get a couple performance confirmations of certain big third-party games that will be headed to Nintendo Switch in case you want to cross-compare how these games run with other versions that are out there today and kind of just know the resolution and frame rates that are supported for some very anticipated titles. So we'll break down all of this info. Before we do, make sure you like, subscribe, and turn on your bell notification to join Sunbro Nation if you're new here, and doing so will indeed enter you into a giveaway for a Nintendo Switch 2 console that will honestly be revealed extremely soon because we are fast approaching the 90K video. Give me a video or two after that so I can draw the winner, make the announcement in the community post section, and also inside the video, so the upcoming video past when we cross 90K, so you'll be communicated to on if it was you or not. But anyway, we need to first kick off this conversation right over at X, where you can see the following post from Genki, not to be confused with the accessory manufacturer that is currently in a lawsuit with Nintendo, but rather a reliable news source that says Nintendo President Shintaro Furukawa says if tariffs change dramatically, they will have to raise the price of the Switch 2. At this time, the top priority is to quickly popularize the Switch 2 hardware. If the assumptions regarding tariffs change significantly, we would like to consider what price adjustments we should make and implement them after considering various factors. And you might remember previously, we did have Nintendo President Doug Bowser, Nintendo of America president, basically just saying that the price that they had in mind for the Switch 2 at $450 was not factoring in tariffs. Now, that may or may not be a true statement. This is a PR head at the end of the day. But regardless, while there were some rumors and I think some expectations online of seeing people maybe expecting Nintendo to price the next-gen console at $399, that also felt very close to Nintendo's Switch OLED model that you can still buy for $350, and you stop and look around at current electronic prices, and we even just saw Xbox raise the price of the Series X by a full $100 and the Series S by $80. And now in this environment and a potential pending price increase from Sony, at the current $450, it doesn't sound too bad. Now, Nintendo is in a little bit different situation than what Xbox and Sony are, as they have the majority of their US stock coming from Vietnam, which seems to be in a much better tariff situation with the US than what China is currently. And to back that up real quick, you do have the industry analyst David Gibson stating that Nintendo confirmed during this investor briefing that North America supply will come mainly from Vietnam. So much for Nikkei's story that Vietnam production was minor, because you might remember some headlines saying that, there might be 100% plus price increases on Nintendo Switch 2 because they were saying that a large portion of Nintendo stock was manufactured in China and only a small portion came from Vietnam. That was unfortunately one of just those entire, misinformation stories that was way off, because Nintendo ahead of time, years and years back, actually prepared for this exact potential situation and diversified their stock between being produced in China, Cambodia, and Vietnam. And now they have Vietnam as an arm that can ship to the US. So all things considered right now, we're probably in a relatively safe spot. But as Furukawa said, it is not guaranteed at the end of the day. And if there is a drastic swing in the percentages of tariffs, maybe from the Vietnam to US, or even if they just go up globally against multiple different countries that are in play, like China and Cambodia, there is a possibility that Nintendo has to sit down and look and raise that price. But in all reality, I think that is going to be a worst case scenario and a last resort for Nintendo, because as Shintaro Furukawa also said, popularizing Nintendo Switch 2 at the launch window of it is very important. If you get off to a fast start with the console, you are attracting third-party devs to want to put their games onto it. You are signaling to your audience that it is a successful system that's going to have a long roadmap of software to come. And if you're in a Wii U situation where it's just failing out of the gate, you don't know if it's going to turn a corner or not. And then a lot of developers, publishers alike, and even just the consumer base at the end of the day start to get cold feet on whether or not they should jump into this console ecosystem at all, or say it's going to be a very short life cycle, like 5 years or less, and they should just wait for what's next from Nintendo. And so if you are somebody who has a pre-order secured, great job. You don't have to worry about paying more than $450 or $500 if you got the bundle edition, USD at least, that is. And if you haven't secured your console yet, you might want to aim for this first calendar year. We don't know what's going to happen with the tariff situation long term, and things change all the time. There is also the My Nintendo Store orders opening up right now. Let me know in the comments if you've received one of those email invites. I registered on the first day and still have not at the time of filming, but these are coming out in waves, and over the weekend I will have an updated pre-order topic situation on what's going on, and if you're still on the hunt for a console, so make sure you're subscribed for that as well. But it's ultimately a coin flip on the pricing situation and what happens in the real global economy. But then I do want to tie that into what the Switch 2 is looking like initially from a sales perspective, because Nintendo has committed to some numbers for the actual launch window of the Nintendo Switch 2. And you can see here from Oatmeal Dome just a quick little snippet of Nintendo Switch 2's initial sales forecast, which will essentially cover April of this year in 2025 all the way to March of 2026. And they have committed to the following. So 15 million units, as you can see here on screen, is what they are putting from a hardware perspective, and 45 million units of software. Now, if you want to know what the Nintendo Switch 1 did during its initial launch fiscal year in a similar timeline, it actually was that same 15 million unit number. And then to also go back to David Gibson that we talked about earlier, an analyst that is chiming in on this. He basically, this is where my thoughts align as well. So Nintendo set the 15 million guidance for Switch 2 based on what Switch did in its first 10 months, but we already have strengthened our production system. We will make efforts to deliver it as soon as possible after the release date. So it's the starting point. And that's what I believe as well. I think Nintendo is doing a very play it safe forecast here with investors, and they don't know exactly what the tariff situation is going to look like, which ties into that pricing conversation that we saw. If there was some need for a big price increase over in the US, that would probably drastically impact sales, at least for a while, on the Switch 2. And so I think they're very aware of that kind of stuff. They also know what's going on with their production line. But if you look at Furukawa's comments on the My Nintendo Store over in Japan, and then also just communicating to even the My Nintendo Store in the US that they're not going to be able to get all the pre-orders out day one, like, they are looking at mass market demand for this thing. And I think it's going to be historically the fastest selling system ever. It will probably pass PS5 for that. But in terms of what it will end up at the entire end of the fiscal year, that remains to be seen. 15 million being the starting point. Obviously, it could be lower than that. But if I was a betting man and there's not a massive price increase, I actually do think that we will probably see it land north of 15 million. So in the 16, 17, 18 range, which does actually line up also with what we were seeing some previous reports predict for Nintendo's supply chain and probably what they could realistically push out to start off a console generation. So you got to remember they have a whole impending holiday season to look forward to globally. And so yes, while price point remains to be somewhat of an issue, it does seem like they are off to an extremely great start if they are comfortable forecasting essentially a Switch 1 repeat of a launch, which was already a historic console launch. So from there, I want to pivot the conversation to a couple different games that we now have information on, and it may give you a little bit more of a sigh of relief if you are seeing some of the comparisons and predicted frame rates and resolutions online from certain brands like Digital Foundry putting in their 2 cents. Sometimes their claims end up accurate, not necessarily always the case. And we now have some new info based off of, some of the look of how games were running and performing on Switch 2 to some of the actual hard facts that we should expect from these games. But you can see Bill Kuhn, who's a reliable insider, actually just put out the box art, which apparently is out there, but this is the first source I saw it at. So for those wondering, Hogwarts Legacy will have a physical copy on Nintendo Switch 2, but it will be a game key card. Nothing new here. Unfortunately, most of the third-party lineup is game key cards. Download size 24 gigabytes. So it's not even like above 32 gigs. it's literally, we may dive into that on a different conversation, but just so you first get the initial look at the box art and what that has to offer, what is more interesting to me, because I'm accepting the fact that physical is going to be a problem from a third-party perspective on the Switch 2 generation, you have this post from Super Metal Dave, where he says, according to a PR statement by Sega, who are publishing Hogwarts Legacy for Switch 2 in Japan, the graphical features of the Switch 2 versions are DLSS support confirmed, HDR support confirmed, 1440p docked, and 1080p in portable. So this is a nice confirmation in terms of the resolution that you're going to be able to expect for Hogwarts Legacy, which is obviously, you know, a modern gen game, but it had PS4, Xbox One versions as well as the Series X and S, but you might remember, and PS5 I should say, but you might remember Nintendo Switch had a downgraded version of this game that was noticeably downgraded. Like, even some things changed where essentially you were not able to traverse certain areas without a load screen on the Switch 1, whereas on the other consoles it was like a seamless connected world, and so you just had entire sections that were cut out by load screens, and I think some of the actual content not being fully delivered on in the game itself. And then you also do have some additional information, which is what I wanted to point out for people who are watching these deep dives right now and judgments of Switch 2 performance before we have the hard facts. You have the Super Metal Dave also detailing, this is another game, by the way, that Digital Foundry claimed was running at 720p and said they saw no DLSS. My guess is that it's probably DLSS performance mode for 1440p, which would be 720p internal. However, with how awesome DLSS is for Switch 2, I doubt anyone will notice. So just another kind of, you know, as you look at the game's performance, when you try to make those initial claims of what the resolution and things look like and you don't notice DLSS, it can be deceiving to the eye, and not everything is gospel right now that's being estimated, let's say, with the Switch 2 performance. And there's a lot of that going on, especially now that the motherboard is leaked, like we talked about in yesterday's video. And we found out that it's a full custom-made NVIDIA chipset. So these 2050s that are being downclocked and trying to estimate the performance are ultimately going to be way off because the architecture is not the same. This is truly a custom built NVIDIA project, or of a chip between NVIDIA and Nintendo. So another game that is getting some good news is that Sid Meier's Civilization, and this comes to us from Necro Felipe, Sid Meier's Civilization 7 will support 4K quality mode in its Switch 2 version. So you have TV mode quality 4K 30 and performance mode is 1080p 60. This is obviously going to be a big one for Civilization fans on the Switch 2 because you get that mouse mode support, which is obviously a huge upgrade, and that's actually something you can do portably as well. So there's going to be a handful of games that I think most people would probably want to pick up on PC, ideally to play with keyboard and mouse. And it's not that you can't do that on the other consoles, but now with the Switch 2, you have the ability to not only do that keyboard and mouse type setup, which I guess the keyboard part remains to be seen, but I'm sure a third-party accessory manufacturer is going to do that, and we'll get keyboard support of some sort on the Switch 2. I'm absolutely sure of. But anyway, you could do that type of game, but also have that mouse control mode wherever you're at portably, like literally setting it on a table in front of you in tabletop mode and using like your jeans or whatever as the mat for the mouse mode will actually work. So there's some cool new, you know, gameplay enhancements and things that for more RTS style games, or just games that you would want to probably play on a PC. Now, one of the biggest reasons you might consider picking it up on PC, you would still have the option of playing in that mode on Switch 2, which is pretty cool. But that about catches us up for topics today. Let me know in the comments down below what you make of all the different news. What do you think of Nintendo's comments surrounding the price increase or potential price increase of Switch 2? Do you think that is something we would potentially actually see this console generation, or do you think they're going to avoid that at all costs? And what do you think about their 15 million initial Switch 2 sales forecast? Is that in line with what you were expecting? Were you expecting maybe a little bit more than that or less than that? And how are you feeling about all things Switch 2 game performance as we learn more and more of the target resolutions and frame rates and things like that we were seeing these games run at? But make sure you share all your thoughts and feelings in the comments down below before you leave, regardless if we agree or disagree. Also, make sure you like, subscribe, turn your notification bell. And with that, I've been Sunbro, you've been Nation. Thanks so much for watching, and I'll see you guys in the next video.